Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining the Georgia Recovers October webinar titled Healing Together, How Engaging in Family Recovery Supports Loved Ones with Substance Use Disorder. My name is Jayla Head, and I am the program coordinator here at Shatterproof, and I'm really excited for our conversation today. So if we could start off with dropping our names, organizations in the chat box, just so we know who all is joining us today. So a few housekeeping points. The webinar will be recorded and a copy of the presentation will be available on the Georgia Recovers website. All attendees will be muted. And please use the Q&A panel on the bottom of your screen to ask any questions. The chat is also available for general commentary, but it will not be moderated as closely. The interpreter will remain spotlighted throughout the webinar. And to adjust your view and see all of the speakers and panelists, click view in the top right corner of your screen and then select speaker or gallery. Users can also select a side-by-side view. We also have captioning services available as well. Ashley will go ahead and drop the string text link in the chat so you all can follow along that way as well. So our agenda for today, our welcome and housekeeping, we'll then move into an About Georgia Recovers section. We'll introduce our speakers and then we'll have a moderated discussion and then we'll wrap up with a Q&A. So on to our Georgia Recovers campaign overview. So Georgia Recovers is an evidence-based public health campaign aimed to reduce the prejudice and discrimination that is associated with substance use disorder in Georgia. The campaign is brought to you by DBHDD and builds off of the pivotal work of the Georgia Council for Recovery. So a few goals and objectives. We seek to increase knowledge about substance use disorder and that recovery is not only possible, but probable. We hope to improve attitudes towards those living with and or in recovery from substance use disorder, and also strengthen the capacity for stakeholders, including organizations and individuals that are already responding to the crisis. So we have 3 pillars of work, starting with community connection. We do connect with different community organizations across the state. We also have our Community Impact Committee, or our CIC, that guides the direction of the campaign. Story sharing is also really pivotal to the Georgia Recovers campaign. So we collect stories of recovery and also allyship, and these stories are shared across our social media channels. We are collecting stories currently as well. So if you are interested in sharing your story with Georgia Recovers, Ashley will go ahead and drop the interest form in the chat and you can learn a little bit more about sharing your story with us. Last but not least, education. So the campaign is changing attitudes by promoting messaging that speaks to hope and recovery. And we also host these monthly webinars that shed light on topics related to substance use disorder. Also connect with us on Instagram and Facebook at Georgia Recovers. And also if you want to become an official campaign partner, you can do so by completing the community partner form, which Ashley will also drop in the chat for easy accessibility. And on to our lovely speakers for today. So starting off with Deena Davis. Deena Davis is a certified addiction and recovery empowerment specialist and works for the Family Treatment Court in Douglas County, where she graduated from in 2010. Deena is the secretary of the National Treatment Court Alumni Association and VP on the board of an RCO in Georgia, the Never Alone Clubhouse. Deena was recently selected as a 2022 Ambassador for Recovery in the state of Georgia and is a part of a Billboard campaign promoting recovery statewide through the Georgia Recovers Project. Deena is a nationally recognized trainer and expert in the field of peer support and was among the first group of CPS-AD in the state of Georgia. She has been living in long-term recovery for over 15 years and has shared her recovery story locally as well as nationally, using her lived experiences to connect with people and help them on their recovery journey. She speaks out about her recovery because she thinks everyone should have the opportunities she has had to find freedom and wants to be a part of removing the stigma behind the disease of substance use disorder. Next, we have Margaret Thompson. Having dedicated her career to the family disease of addiction for over 20 years, Margaret brings a wealth of knowledge, clinical experience, and group, individual, and family methods to her practice. She believes in possibility over pathology, and this philosophy led her to create Embrace Family Recovery, LLC. As a certified coach, family members work alongside her to develop healthier strategies to cope and even thrive through addiction. Margaret's traditional, extensive training and work with thousands of people affected by the disease of addiction at the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation has been complemented by her recent venture in coaching. Margaret is a dynamic speaker and a lifelong student. She is a certified coach with the Coach Training Alliance, and she recovers. As a coach, she brings her long-term active recovery from codependence and food addiction to the table. Margaret's practice is hybrid, fully embracing social media and educational podcasts. The Embrace Family Recovery podcast, webinars, and providing online family work. Her enthusiasm and ability are matched by the creativity of her approach to family recovery. So thank you all so much for being here today. I'm super excited that we have our speakers joining us. And we can go ahead and get started with our moderated discussion. How are you all feeling today?
Wonderful. So good to be with you. Thank you for inviting me. And Deena and I are going to offer what we can to you. I think we have a lot to offer. Deena, your resume is quite impressive. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Margaret. I feel the same way. And I'm looking forward to having this just open, honest discussion about, real life. So.
Yeah, so thank you all again so much for being here. So jumping off into our first question, how does understanding addiction as a family disease change our perspective on addiction and recovery?
Deena, you want to start or would you like me?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is, obviously I want to answer the question, but I also want to highlight the facts that, sure, it's a truth. When I was in my active addiction, I was like a tornado and I was dragging everyone around in that tornado. But what I want to highlight just from that first question is that when I recovered, I was also like a tornado, and I was pulling everyone into my recovery. And so addiction can be a family disease, but recovery happens in families as well. And so not only did I get better, but I had the strength and the courage and the tools that I needed to bring in recovery to my entire family. So
there is so much hope in recovery. I think we dwell a lot of our time and energy, because we're in the throes of the insanity of the disease, to feel like there's no hope. And I'm here to tell you there is hope. There is hope when someone is breathing, when someone is alive, which is why I believe in harm reduction and education about Narcan and those options out there. There's a lot of controversy about should we, will we, won't we? My kids carry it. I carry it. My hope is that even though someone may need Narcan more than once, that may be the time that they surrender to a chance to have a different quality of life through recovery. When it comes to the family disease of addiction, my interpretation is when someone in the parental units has the disease, the children are raised by the people and the disease. And the focus that I impress on everybody is, how do we learn to separate the person from their disease when we live it for ourselves to help demolish some of that shame that it's building on us? And how do we, as loved ones, learn to separate the person from the disease? Because we know this disease is a pathological relationship with a substance or behavior that supersedes every other human need a person has when they're in the battles with this disease. And so that changes character, creates unbecoming, to say it nicely, behavior that we engage in, and it creates thrifts in the family. And it's a very complex illness. However, the solution is simple. And I think, to Deena's point, recovery can heal so many, even if only one of us gets in recovery within that family system.
I wanted to just, Margaret, when we were prepping for this yesterday, one of the things that you said, and I wrote it down because it was so powerful to me, we're all on the same team. It's the disease that we're fighting. And I think if we can always remember that, moving forward with whatever the situation is with the person or loved one, that is the key right there. We're not fighting the person, we're fighting this disease, and we have to fight it together.
Yes, Deena. And the other piece that I think is so vital about what you said is the disease lives in isolation. You said it yesterday, the antidote is connection. And so the disease lives in isolation. And if we allow the disease to destroy our family system, which is our first line of defense, if you like, and we don't learn how to set boundaries against the disease while loving the person, it's going to be really hard to heal, because the disease requires isolation to thrive. And if we can stay connected, at least there's always those touchstones from family members say, hey, I love you. I may not be allowed around you right now because I can't be around the risks you're taking, but I love you. And when you're ready for help, I'm here. So we got to work from that standpoint. And I know it's tough. This is not an easy journey.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your responses so far. You've brought up amazing concepts, like isolation and connection being the antidote, and also being able to separate the person from the disease, and realizing that, we're all in this together, but we're trying to combat the disease, not the person. And so that really goes into our next question, which reads, what are some effective strategies for family members to separate addictive behavior from the individual struggling with addiction while still offering support?
Go ahead.
So what I like to teach, because I work with the families, I've worked with both sides of this coin through my whole career, but I'm focusing on the families because I feel families get crumbs for help compared to the people with the substance use disorder or the addiction. And what I teach my families is how counterintuitive this feels to them. So, for example, if someone has diabetes, let's do even cancer, God forbid, the societal norm is lean in, do for, get them everything, give them help, pay their bills, clean their house, anything necessary to make it easier for them to focus on what? Their treatment and recovery, right? That's natural support of someone with an illness. That's why this illness is so baffling. It's because we as family members will do exactly that around someone with the disease of addiction and unknowingly make the disease stronger rather than assisting the person we love to get strength. It's counterintuitive. Our work in recovery is, how do I love my person while setting boundaries against the disease? Because if we don't, as family members, we will be destroyed by the power it holds over us as well. And so the disease of addiction is complex in nature because it is a disease, a no-fault disease. No one in the family is to blame for having it. However, the responsibility of getting well is an inside job. And Deena, I'm sure you can touch on that. The work to get well is ours to do. Our families cannot do it for us. Even out of all the love in the world, there's no malintent, but it is an inside job to get recovery. And that's why communities of recovering folks are our lifeline when we get into our well stage and start working on our recovery.
Yeah, so hearing you refer to the cancer piece, I mean, I've used that, and like you said, God forbid, I hate to use that because it's such a devastating disease. But I've also used that reference as it pertains to us, people, with the substance use disorder. And I'll be honest with you, when I refer to it as, people volunteer. Hey, can I take you to your chemo? Can I start a meal train? What do you need? Can I give you a care basket? And all of those types of things. And we, as the person who's struggling, who sometimes we and the people that I work with can't even find a ride to get to treatment and things like that. I'll be honest though, I've never really thought about the family of the person who is struggling. And so, you know, part of this removing the stigma is so that we are all treated fairly, so that when I am the person, you know, who needs to go to treatment and I don't even have personal hygiene products and things like that, that people will step in and say, hey, what can I do to help you? And a group of people can also support my family and go behind the family and say, this is what's going to happen. This is what you may find helpful. These are some meetings and some groups and supports and therapies. And you're right. I mean, all of it is an inside job. You know, one of the things that I will always say is true is that, oh, I get emotional, is that I needed there to be somebody that didn't give up on me, right? And even though there were situations I had put myself in where my parents were unable to really support me or be around me or take me somewhere, because God forbid the places that I was going, the places that I was showing up as were not great places. But I always knew that they believed in me and that they always had this hope that somewhere on the other side of all of this, I was going to be the person that I was created to be. Yes. So yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of letting you know that, like, I'm guilty of thinking of just me, and not so much of the family. But I think this is why this discussion is so important. And it's not to isolate us, and it's not for us to isolate the family, you know. And the truth is that a lot of us have burned so many bridges by the time we make it into our recovery journey, that, you know, a lot of our families aren't there to support us, you know, and rightfully so in some situations. But I think where if each entity is healing, like you said, and seeking and has supports and connections and things like that, I think in the long run that we heal together.
I want to add to that, Deena. You know, one of the things that's so imperative in my opinion, of separating myself as a recovering addict and all the shame I carried as a mother, I have to use language, even though I don't want to, because my disease doesn't want me to. My disease caused the wreckage and the harm to my family. I, as a good woman that I believe I am at my core, was hijacked by a disease that took over all those sense of right and wrongs. And even if I came to and realized I screwed up in my disease had the solution for me. Get out of Dodge, go medicate. And so from a family's perspective, it's really difficult to know how to intervene, what to say, what not to say. And I'm a big proponent. If your loved one is wanting help, you show up, and you show up hard and fast. Like when you say somebody needs a ride to treatment, heck yeah, I'll take you to treatment. I'll take you for your outpatient if I have the ability in my time, if I have the resources, the gas money, all that stuff, because we got to recognize this takes a toll financially on the entire family system, not just the person with the illness. And so I think that's really important. And I loved that you shared, I think it was I'm guilty of being selfish. Don't we have to be selfish to survive an active addiction? Because the disease requires us to only think about ourselves and our next high, our next fix. And what's beautiful about recovery, that changes. That even though it may feel selfish when our loved ones are going to meetings or going to meet with sponsors or going to treatment, and they're like, whoa, families are like, hello, when do I show up? When do I matter? That's us being selfish on the family side. Because the reality is if we want our loved one to be well, they got to do the chemo. They got to do the treatment. And I mean, AA, NA, whatever it is people do, methadone. We've got to give them the dignity to recognize that their recovery journey will take them from us a little bit, but it's different because what they're getting in those rooms, what they're getting in those meetings, what they're getting from their sponsors, their fellowship is a way back to us.
Oh yeah, I remember as a adult child of an alcoholic, I can remember when one of my parents came into recovery. I remember being so jealous. I would be like, you know, what's the difference? You were gone to the bars, now you're gone to meetings. You know what I mean? It wasn't until I got sober that I realized, oh, okay, I get this now. And, you know, I was just kind of telling on myself a little bit that not really being selfish about my recovery, but just like not thinking about the family unit as a whole. But yeah, one of the things we talked about yesterday is one of the first things that I heard in early recovery, and that is that I suffer from a disease that talks to me in my own voice and wants me dead. And that has been profound to me, because that's the truth. It's hard for, like we talked yesterday, it's hard for me to even separate myself from the disease. And if I am lacking in those connections and those supports and things like that, if I get too isolated or too by myself, then I will sit around and I'll start listening to that voice that sounds just like me and starts telling me things, that aren't true.
Absolutely. And that's why what I say is when I go to my meetings, I have mirrors held up to me all around that room to help me see the voice is actually there when I can't see it for myself. We need those people in our lives who can hear the voice when we can't. And so that's why family can't be a tool for our recovery. I know that's alarming because that's all family wants to be, but they can't be, because if my partner says to me, why haven't you been to a meeting? Guess what kind of reaction they're going to get? You didn't just tell me what I'm supposed to do. And I'm rebellious at nature, my core. But if a fellow recovering person, someone who I do a hookup call with, or someone in my fellowship says, you seem crispy, that's my term for struggling, because relapse happens way before picking up. We all know that. And well, I shouldn't say that. That's assumption. I know that my relapse starts way before I pick up my substance of no choice. My relapse starts with thinking and with pulling away. It's starting to isolate, starting to go back to the thoughts of, wow, that would be nice. And so if my fellowship, someone from my fellowship says to me, hey, I've missed you. Haven't seen you in a while. You okay? Or you've been sounding crispy when we've talked. You want to maybe meet me in a meeting? I can hear that different than I can from my significant other. And so I think that's important.
Yeah. And I also just want to make a note that, there was a time, obviously so much has changed, so much has shifted. Language is so much different now. What used to be acceptable is no longer acceptable. Like, you don't get to talk about us the way you used to. And I'm sure the family probably feels the same way in their own ways. But one of the things that I think used to be a go-to is to tell people, you got to have tough love. And I have some feelings about that technique. I think there is a way of protecting yourself or protecting myself without exposing that tough love, because if the opposite of addiction is human connection, then where does tough love fall in that?
So I think that's a great topic that we could do a whole nother talk on, because I think people have lots of ways of viewing tough love. What I love, a term that I prefer instead of, like, for example, detach with love, which sends off bells in people, is caring without fixing.
Right. And that's part of a training as a peer support is like, I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to meet you wherever you are. And I think we use that term so loosely, meet them where they are. Like that means like emotionally, physically, spiritually, like wherever a person is. That doesn't mean meet them where they are if they're at Kroger. You know what I mean? Like, there's more to it than that. And I think we have to make sure we're providing safe places for families and for those of us who struggle, so that they can show up as they are, so that we can then meet them in that space.
I think it's also important to add that as a person with a substance use disorder or another addiction, I say other addiction because I'm a food addict. So people don't include that as a substance use disorder, but it's as powerful to me to take me off the rails as it would be for someone in an addiction with a substance, a mood altering substance. It is for me. The thing that I would say that we don't realize until we get the education is family members decline in their wellness in a parallel state to the person with a substance use disorder or addiction. So as a person goes down what I call the Jellinek chart, which is what I was taught by with Arch.
Yep.
I have created one for families to see so that I can parallel what we do on the family side along with the person who has a substance. So what that means to me and to the people I work with is, if I recognize that I am declining in my wellness, kind of alongside the person I love who's declining in their wellness with their addiction, I have to recognize I'm not making sane decisions. I'm not using my my care for me. For example, how many people have I talked to who have gone to very dangerous areas to find their person in the height of a using binge with their children in the car. We lose sense of what is safe and appropriate and healthy response because we're so reactive as we get less well. And so we've got to, as you said, Deena, find ways to stay connected that are safe for us and our children, for safe from the disease, not the person, but the disease and the risks that come along with active addiction.
Yeah, thank you all for your points. I mean, so many great points. I'm like, where do I start? Which is a great problem to have. But even a follow-up question that came up for me as you all are speaking, can you all speak a little bit more to what that mirroring decline looks like? So like for family members, how can they identify and determine, okay, we're on a mirroring decline. What does that look like?
So I want to put it in, I don't know if this is going to sound right. It's coming straight from where it's coming from. When you're really close to someone and they have, God forbid, dementia, you're living with them, you're seeing it, but you're really not seeing it till your child comes home after being gone for 6 months and they're like, wow, look at it as weight gain, look at it as weight loss, right? When you're so close to the persons you love, there is that element of not seeing. A great analogy, which is gross, but if you had a pot of boiling water and you threw a frog in, what are they going to do? Jump out. If you put the frog in, then bring the water to the boil. That's how this disease works in a family. So there's an increase, for example, there's an increased tolerance of unacceptable behavior that we tolerate in a family system. We wouldn't if it was just a stranger. Right? There's a powerlessness over our substance of no choice. And I call it a powerlessness over our walking, talking human being of no choice. And I don't mean that to be disrespectful. I mean that a family member's drug of no choice is their person. While a person with a substance use disorder may be an opiate, that's their drug of no choice, right? And so what they do around their opiate, we do around our person. Is that making sense? Please ask me to clarify if it isn't. So like obsession and preoccupation, Deena, right? When we're in the disease, our obsession and preoccupation is through the roof. Our tunnel vision is survival. It's how do I get enough? How do I hide it? How do I get past it? How do I use it? How do I recover? As a family member, our tunnel vision is how to make sure my person's okay. How do I make sure they get through the day? How do I make sure that I know where they are? Do I need to go look for them, right? So that preoccupation obsession is going on both sides of the coin. And it's fueled by a need to feel okay. So as a person with an addiction, I was using as much as I could to feel okay. As a family member, I am fixated and preoccupied on my person as much as it takes to feel I can breathe a little bit, I'm okay.
Yeah. And to that, I will say too, when, oh my God, I just lost my train of thought.
It'll come back.
Yes, it will.
Was it about the parallel of the preoccupation?
Well, I was just thinking, like one of the things, this isn't exactly what I was thinking of. Hopefully it'll come back as I just start talking. But one of the things that, is worth pointing out is that, the people who are in recovery, we struggle with this too, because we've left behind people that were important to us, right? I know that a lot of treatment people and a lot of, probation and jails and those types of places, a lot of times will have this habit of saying to us, those people are not your friends, right? And they were my friends. They were my family. They were my go-to. They were there for me when nobody else was. So I had a bond with people like that, right? And so even for myself, when I got sober and my daughter's father did not get sober, and I had to make some hard decisions about, no, they're not going to be around you if you're still actively using. I felt like a hypocrite, right? I felt like, oh my God, like really, like we were living in a meth lab. But now that I'm sober, I'm to do person, and no, you can't be around your children. But I think that I still haven't come back with my complete train of thought. But I think that just that alone, you know, I can relate to what you're saying. And I think, you know, this is what I was going to say. Working in the court system, what I find a lot of is that, you know, obviously you said it, you know, the family is responsible for their recovery piece of this. And what I see a lot of is families who are not doing that. And some families who are constantly, you know, they can't be well when the person gets sober, right? Because that was their life. And so if that family member isn't taking care of themselves and they aren't doing the things they need to do, they will literally drag us down, or they could possibly, you know, destroy the whole family dynamic, just because I can't function with you sober, right? What's my purpose? What do I do? And so I think that was the piece that I wanted to just bring to the table. And I hope I didn't say anything wrong or
No, I'm so glad you brought it apart. But what I want to throw out there is nobody makes a person use and nobody makes a person recover.
Oh, yeah.
So if the family doesn't get well, which they don't a lot. I agree with you 100%. And why they don't get well? What are they given for services?
Right. I mean, we do try to include that in our work, but it's not
Getting better. We're getting way better, thank God. But they get maybe a family counseling session in a treatment center, one. They maybe get invited to a family program if they can afford to go to it. They get encouraged to go to Al-Anon, which is a wonderful program, or Nar-Anon, right? But many therapists don't understand the family disease of addiction also. It's not because of a fault of theirs, it's because of lack of training. We haven't trained our professionals. We haven't trained our medical professionals, let alone our counselor professionals, if they get a basic master's in counseling, to understand this family disease of addiction. So that's why I get so hot about bringing family up. So you're absolutely right. There's a homeostasis of a mobile going on in the family, right? Y'all know that. We all know that. We live in a family system. And so when you think of a baby mobile, what happens if the baby pulls one string? Right? The rest go, cool. So what I look at it is like, if you, Deena, in your family, bless your heart, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, because I'm getting south down here now that I moved. You pull the plug, you're pulling down on that mobile because you're working your hiney off getting well, right? Everyone around you is going, whoa, wait a minute, this isn't what we used to do with Deena. We don't know the new game or the new dance or the new way to communicate or any of that stuff. And so they resist because they want to feel that normal homeostasis. And your job in your recovery with your fellowship and your tools is to stay the course, because what happens is the staying the course will bring back a new equilibrium. Does that make sense? And so, yes, family members deserve, my word, way more education and resources to understand that their drug of no choice is a walking, talking human being. And if that walking, talking human being gets wellness through their recovery, they're going to struggle. They go into withdrawal. There's such a thing as withdrawal for family.
Yeah.
They navigate it the best they know how without the skills to know how. And so I hope we continue to grow and do more for families like you are doing here at Georgia Recovers, which is wonderful.
Yeah. And let's not hide the fact that treatment for us is also almost impossible these days. So even though there are focused, you know, more things focused, we're doing a lot of recovery community organizations, thanks to the Georgia Council and DBHCD. And so lots of things are happening for us. You know, treatment is ridiculous for us to try to get into, and in lots of ways, really. Like, we have to be sober to get in, but we can't, you know, if we could get sober to get in, we would be sober anyways. Or you can test positive for this, but you can't test positive for that. So you have to be a scientist on the streets just to figure out, you know, how you can get into treatment. So
there's way more work to be done. When I started in the field of addiction in 1996, it was all self-pay, insurance covers nothing. Right. So even if that wasn't good, at least we now have some insurance coverage for treatment. And I think we're moving in a positive direction. But yes, we need more care, and we're losing professionals who are burnt out, who are also struggling in the field. We've lost a lot of people through COVID, sadly, in the mental health world, the medical world, who are just burnt out and struggling with how to show up in a system that feels broken.
Thank you all so much for, you know, your conversation, and even highlighting the different systemic barriers that impact, lack of access, lack of equitable access for both families and also people that are in active addiction. So thank you for that. Moving on to our next question. How can family members create boundaries with the disease while loving the person? What does this look like?
Deena, I'd love you to start if you would and share what you did with your children around their dad, because that to me is an exact example of this statement.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and I touched on it a little bit, but the one side of it was me, having to throw in that protective barrier for my children that, yes, that for 7 years, my oldest daughter lived in chaos. And because I became sober through the family treatment court, I had to make a decision that was no longer acceptable for my children. And they were, we were going to move forward in a different light. And my kids were getting really let down by their dad, right? And it was when this started happening that I decided that I had to make that decision. But, we all know what this looks like, right? I'm going to come over and see you. I don't come over and see you. The kids are literally waiting by the door and looking through the blinds and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, I don't have to highlight the heartbreak that some of this, our substance use disorder can cause people. However, my children were seeing all of the thing about substance use disorders is that when I break out into my symptoms, they look terrible. They look like bad choices. They look like I don't care. When I don't show up for family visits, that looks like I don't love my kids, right? And we all know as professionals, we know that is not the truth. But my kids didn't know that. They thought their dad was coming down the driveway. Their dad didn't come down the driveway. They were getting mad at their dad. And so what I've taught them, and he did finally make his way into recovery, and we're all grateful for that. But until that happened, what I had to tell them was like, my kids, one of the gifts that recovery gave me is I was able to educate my children age appropriately as they've gone through my recovery with me. And so they already knew about alcoholism and drug addiction and things like that. And so what I had to do for them is tell them, be mad at this disease, be mad at your dad's disease, be mad all you want to, but love your dad, because I promise you, if your dad was healthy, he wouldn't miss anything. You guys are too awesome. He would never miss anything, not a date, not a party, not a birthday, nothing. And so that was a tool that I used as a family person, right? Who had a member of extended family that was struggling with this disease. So that would be my example.
Thank you. It's beautiful. And that's exactly what I wish for families to gain, resources to talk about it openly with children and grandchildren, because left to their own devices, they believe it's their fault. And by you intervening, your children knew the disease was creating this. This was nothing they did or didn't do. And that the disease was hijacking dad and keeping dad away. And, when we have all of those emotional things going on in our family system that are very normal, healthy, normal feelings, and I don't like the word normal, which is really interesting. I'm using it. But the reality is we do experience a turmoil within us of, how do I keep my person, my vulnerable people away from their person, but it's really their disease. Like, that's just a tough rub. So it's being creative. One of the things I've encouraged people to do who've been disconnected from their children due to their family setting a boundary. You cannot see your kids, right? Which I will always encourage people to use creative ways and tools. If you can, every time you think of your child and you're not in their presence, write a little letter to them. Write their name, date it, and write what the memory was you were thinking of, or the thought about them, or the story you wanted to tell them, and put all of those in a box, because one day those babies are going to be adults and they're going to want to know you. And they're going to know that despite your illness and your treatments and whatever you're doing, your recovery, if you weren't in their picture, you still absolutely loved them, cared for them, missed them, and wanted to be in their life. I'm not a proponent of cutting people off from seeing their family. Please let me say that. However, I am a proponent of exactly what Deena did, setting guardrails against the disease to protect the family members. And so that might look like visitation needs to be in public places. It may be supervised based on court requirements. It may be certain times of the day. I had a good friend who went through treatment and had a lot of using friends still, and they meant something. As you said, they meant something to him. And so what he did was he picked a breakfast restaurant with no alcohol, and obviously there were no other substances in that restaurant, and he would invite those friends to meet him. And if they came, meant they were able to. If they didn't, he didn't judge or shame them, but he kept his sobriety safe and still engaged with them in a way that he could. And so it's being creative, and that doesn't always come easily when we're highly stressed, highly activated, and in a reactive mode that is created by the disease of addiction. Because the disease of addiction creates fear in us, resentment in us, and a little bit of pissed off in us. And so when we're in that place, we tend to be quicker to react. And the job of family is to slow down reactivity, remembering when we look at the person, they are a human being with a painful disease that is affecting them spiritually, physically, and emotionally. And how do we be involved with them that feels okay for us and lets them know we love them and we are there while keeping us safe?
Thank you all. So this conversation actually goes into our next question. What practical steps can families take to support their loved ones in recovery? Their loved one's recovery journey, and how can they prioritize their own well-being during this process?
The best analogy that I've ever seen, I will ever see, is putting your own oxygen mask on the airplane before you put it on your loved one, to use as a simile to recovery with addiction. So I'm from the island of Bermuda. I lived in Minnesota, Wisconsin for a very long time, and I would take my babies on that plane. And I'm teaching this stuff at that point, right? Like I'm in the family program, I'm in recovery, I'm hearing it in meetings, I'm teaching it. And I would hear them say that. And I got my little babies next to me. And I would go in my head, you think I'm putting it on me first? You're crazy. That was my instinct reaction. And I talked to a pilot once and I said, how long, if something were to happen, would I be able to function in a plane if I didn't do what you taught us to do? He said seconds. Within seconds, I would not be able to move my fingers and motor skills like I need to then assist my babies. And it was like the penny dropped of what I'd always taught to a personal internalized level. My God, if I don't care for me and put it on me first, I can't help them who will be scared and moving and doing what they're doing on the plane because of what's happening. So that's the same thing in recovery. It feels wrong when we see someone in crisis in their addiction to say, whoa, I've got to take care of me first. That feels fundamentally wrong. But think about it. If we do what we historically do as family members, which is, would we agree that addiction's like a roller coaster? The disease just goes up and down and all around, and it's a pretty wild ride. As family members, our instinct is to put a quarter in and jump on the ride with our loved one. So that means we're going up and down and around. Are we any good to our loved one if we are like throwing up, screaming, wanting to get off? No. But if we stand on the side, which is terribly hard to do, and we engage in our recovery tools, we get a counselor if that's what we need, we follow up with our well-being and our mental health on all levels, then we are there in a much more stable way to make decisions to assist and support the person we love more than anyone in this world who is suffering in their disease. And then we can offer them a much better version of ourselves and resources to help them. So that's why it feels so counterintuitive, but I think it's imperative, or else we're not in a healthy place. We're reactive, we're activated, and we're not doing what we can do to help them.
Yeah. And I mean, same for us, right? Same for the people in recovery. I know that I have to keep my recovery first, no matter what, you know what I mean? And so regardless of what my family's doing, I have to keep my recovery first. You know, one of the things I would, love to throw in here, and I feel like, our audience may know a lot of this, and it may be, standing on a soapbox that everybody's standing on with me. But I think during those times, I think it's so important that we, all of us, families, people in recovery, this is why we have to go out into communities and teach about this disease and preach about recovery from it, and bring in families so that they're educated about the science of this addiction and what that could look like. But I think, what happens probably instinctually is that, it's that shaming and blaming and those types of things that can be so harmful for a person who is in the throes of, of their addiction. And I think, one of the reasons why I try so hard to, and so many of us in recovery, so many of my CARES friends who I see in the audience, so many of us are trying to move mountains to make sure that the stigma of this disease is no longer a part of this. My friend Neil Campbell always says that the system is in recovery. And I believe that, our communities are in recovery. It's not just me and it's not just my family. It's this whole system. And I think we have to really make sure that we're, challenging biases in other people and our workplace, that, everybody doesn't work in this field. So, there's a lot of people who have, regular jobs or, work in restaurants and things like that. And I think we all have to be more mindful and challenging everyone around us to make sure that we're not talking about this disease and the people with it in a shameful, blaming way. Because what I know to be the truth, when I first got sober, I used to stand on every soapbox I could, anywhere anybody would let me stand, behind a podium or on a stage or anywhere, and talk about recovery. And the longer I stay sober, the more I realize that it is the stigma of this disease that keeps so many of us in dark places and bad houses, and, every single morning waking up dreading and regretting everything that we did. And so I think it's important as family members of people like me that we have to, like you said, I think I'm sitting here like visually doing some of this stuff in my head as you're talking, Margaret. And it's like, this disease is like, label it, call it. When I first got sober, I named mine. I won't tell you what her name was, but she had a name, you know what I mean? And I identified, I talked to her, I let everybody know what this is so-and-so showing up, Yes. And if the family can really, honest to godly, see the addiction outside of the person as this entity, this, this separate thing from the person that they love. I think,
it affords grace.
yes.
It affords grace to us who have it. It affords grace to us who love people who have it.
Yes.
And the other thing we have to do is afford family members grace. Because
when they do, if they do screw up or they do, use,
family members relapse faster than people with substance use disorder every time. Do you realize that? Family members go to fear-based fixed control management. So Mila, I'm okay. This is my therapy dog. She used to work in a school, and obviously she's hearing the heat coming through the conversation. We're good, baby. So the thing that I was going to say is that fixed managed control is active use of our codependent behavior as family members. That's what we do. We feel out of control. We jump into fixed, manage, and control. And so the reality is, fix, manage, control happens
so fast. Yeah.
Before
so be nice. Show grace. Be nice to yourself if you do. And I hate to cut. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think we all have to be so much nicer to ourselves. And hearing you say that is like, if you are a family member of a person who is struggling, and you do screw it up, it's the same way I do in recovery. It's that making amends. It's that 10th step. It's that fourth and fifth step. It's all of those things that I have to learn how to do, that I'm going to screw up. I'm gonna, even in recovery, even, teaching the power of language, I'm going to screw up sometimes. I'm going to see somebody that's going to challenge a bias that I have in myself. And I'm going to think something that I'm going to, whoa, I don't do that anymore. I don't think like that anymore. I don't talk like that anymore. So yes, definitely. Not suggesting that we all are perfect, but I think, like you said, we have so much more we've come so far.
We have.
And we have so much farther to go.
We do. We'll always sadly have a job to do.
Yeah.
I'd be okay to get a new career if I could. If this magically went away tomorrow, I'd be happy to be a florist, right? The reality is there's a need. And my thing is, I agree on both sides of the coin of this illness. We need more and more services. Family, we get frustrated with, because family should know better because they're not using. Well, hello. I think that's a judgment that's not fair, because family are in the depths of despair, fear. I was just with a family who got news that their loved one was at such and such a street at 2 a.m. They've been AWOL at 2 a.m. How do you then go to work the next day and function when those are those helpful texts you're getting in the middle of the night? Like, we have to give each other grace. This is a tsunami that comes in through the disease, hits the person first, and then wipes out everybody around them if we don't take care of ourselves.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And I see that this strategy of like naming the disease is really resonating with our participants, our audience members. So thank you all for bringing that up. I do want to take some time to discuss our last question before we hop into our Q&A. And again, for our audience members, please use the Q&A panel if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Margaret and Deena. So last but not least, what are some tangible tools, resources, or coping strategies that attendees can implement in their lives to navigate addiction as a family disease more effectively?
There are so many, but we don't necessarily know. For example, for our children, Sesame Street has a character who has parents with the disease of addiction. You think about a little preschooler sitting at home, seeing that skit with Elmo talking to this beautiful little wonderful puppet whose mom is at a meeting, and think they could hear something that may help them realize they're not alone. To books like Mommy's Getting Sober, Hot Dogs Anonymous, to a children's program where they can go and learn to separate mom, dad, grandma, sibling from their disease and do the same things we're talking about, but in an age-appropriate level. I am a big proponent of 12-step recovery. It has saved me. I entered through Al-Anon for my own recovery when I was in a relationship with an ex-fiance who had a compulsion addiction, their words, they decide. And I then got into recovery with food addiction, thanks to my higher power and being exposed to that 12-step recovery. So I'm a big fan of that, but I'm also very well aware there is many pathways to get well. What I would say for families though, until we understand how the disease has impacted us, we are at a deficit in being able to help the person we love the most who's struggling with the disease. So find education, listen to podcasts, Embrace Family Recovery Podcast, or Addiction in My Child, or whatever one you want to find. Those are great to just listen while you're walking and feel less alone and maybe get a strategy to help you move forward.
Yeah, and I noticed one of the comments from my friend George was, talking about how to assist and encourage or educate family members who don't believe that it's a disease. So that's such a powerful question, because here we are talking about it like it's a disease. So many people don't see it that way, and so I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't even know if I have an answer to it. One of the things, the science of addiction for me, there's a lot of us that are trained to do that, where we can take the science and put a behavior where it's like, oh, this is what happens when a mom doesn't show up for a visit. This is what's happening in the brain and things like that. But I thought it warranted at least saying out loud, to kind of throw up some. Yeah, I know we don't have time. Maybe that's our next conversation, right? Maybe that's our next webinar.
I have a resource, because I agree with you. I think the way that we get to know it's a disease is teaching it. I was a master's educated counselor. I didn't believe it was a disease. I'm not proud of that. But until I immersed myself at Hazelden, which I had the fortune to be taught, did I realize that it was a no-fault disease. But the resource out there on YouTube that anyone can watch if they want to is Pleasure Unwoven. It's a very, very good resource to understand the chemistry, the brain, the neurology in a creative and informative way. It's a free resource. So if anybody wants to see that video, they might learn a little bit of how we came to the place of believing it's a disease.
Yeah. And I think, we're not going to change everybody's mind, right? We know that for a fact. So I think we just have to keep standing up, and we just have to keep talking about it and sharing our stories of recovery. And I think, the more of us who are upfront and out loud in our recoveries, we're changing the word on the streets out there, right?
You bet. Anonymous People, another good resource.
Oh yeah, that's a great one.
There's a lot of good stuff out there. Part of it is just not knowing until you realize. What do you think? If one person is affected by this illness, how many around them are impacted, right? It's about 24. That's just close proximity to work, to community. You think about the numbers out there that are impacted by this illness and have not been given the gift of information and access to information.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your answer. And thank you, Deena, for, directing us into our Q&A portion. George's question was really, really great. And I want to make sure we're answering both parts of the question. So there is a second part that says, I'll read the whole thing, but what about services for people and families who do not believe it is a disease? And then the second portion says, or that abstinence or ignoring or changing the obsessions via treatment is a necessary prerequisite. So how do we address, those people that believe that abstinence and treatment is necessary before, anything else?
I have the same answer, I guess, for what we did before, but I'll self-disclose, I came in to recovery as a 12-stepper, and that was the way I was taught, is that we don't use anything, no mind altering, all of that stuff. And so when harm reduction came, when more people were talking about harm reduction, and that people started talking about it, and I started listening, right? Not judging, but listening. I had no choice but to change my mind, right? I saw a little girl on Facebook with a sign that said, Narcan saved my mom's life, and she's been sober for 2 years. And it hit me. I was like, oh my God, I get it. Like what you said, if they're breathing, there's hope. And so I think one thing we have to do is that we don't back down. We have to keep educating. We have to keep saying, and we've found our seats at tables that we used to not be at, I think both for families and for people in recovery. And I think we just have to keep educating people and keep insisting that we don't get to determine what recovery looks like for somebody, not as a clinician, not as a community, not as a family member, that we don't get to determine that. And so, I think change happens the more of us there are who are willing to talk about it and educate people.
I've met many people who believed they could make someone else well. And most of them have plenty of evidence to know telling someone else what to do or planning what their program should be, that didn't work. So giving people the dignity and respect to find their path that works for them is vital. It may not be the path I would have chosen or I was gifted, but it's their path. Medical assisted treatment has come a long way to assist people with cravings, with withdrawals, with being able to hold a job, no other way possible, right? So we have to look at all of the options. And I think that, excuse me, being open to learning and hearing and recognizing that I should not, in my humble opinion, stand in judgment of what other people's path looks like. The whole goal would be to have people feel like they get to stand in their own presence and feel a new sense of integrity because they can live the life they dreamed when they couldn't even begin to put one foot in front of the other because some disease was dragging them down to this despairing place. There also is other recovery resources out there. There's the Christian side of it. So those that are biblically aligned, like Celebrate Recovery, Quest 180. There's also Smart Recovery, Dharma Recovery. There's a lot of different paths. The good news is a lot of them are accessible and no cost. Just get in a seat, find a meeting, get on a Zoom meeting and see what's out there.
Yeah, thank you so much. I wish that we have more time because this conversation is even more amazing than I imagined. But I really want to thank you, Margaret and Deena, for your time, your expertise, your experience, and just being so open and vulnerable with our audience. We do have a post-webinar survey that we'd love for our attendees to fill out just so we can get some more information about how did you find this effective. But also thanks to Margaret and Deena, we'll be able to send out some more resources for you all, so be on the lookout for that. And thank you so much, Jasmine, for your services as well. We really appreciate you.
Yes.
Yeah, and then we hope that everyone has a great rest of their Tuesday.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.